Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, council members, city officials, and our streaming audience. I'd like to welcome everyone to the October 24th City Council meeting. We have 8 items on our agenda this evening. We are meeting here in chambers with safety restrictions for public attendance and streaming live on YouTube. Moving forward, if you would, Ms. Moss, please continue with the roll call of the members.
Thank you, President Geringer. Greg Phillips.
Here.
Payne. Nickerson. Here. Farrow.
Here.
Henderson.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Preston.
Here.
Anthony Phillips.
Here.
Prohl.
Here.
Ms. Payne had communicated that she'd been stuck traveling back from Chicago due to airlines. Do we have a motion to excuse Ms. Payne from tonight's meeting? Motion by Ms. Henderson, seconded by Mr. Tony Phillips. Roll call on the motion to excuse Ms. Payne.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Roll call on the motion to excuse Ms. Payne is passed. At this time, if you would, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, everyone. The minutes of the previous meeting have been distributed for review. Do we have any additions or corrections to the minutes? And if not, do I have a motion to accept the minutes as they are?
President Geringer, I'd like to make a motion that we waive the 3-day receipt rule on the minutes due to the updated version.
Motion by Ms. Henderson to waive the 3-day receipt rule on the minutes, seconded by Ms. Preston. Roll call on the motion.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion is passed. Roll call on accepting the minutes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
I made an error and did not ask for the motion to accept those minutes. Can I have a motion to accept those minutes? Ms. Henderson, seconded by Ms. Preston. Roll call on Ms. Henderson's motion. Apologies.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
The minutes have been accepted. We'll now move to the reports of our committees. We'll begin with our Community Affair Committee with Mr. Greg Phillips.
Thank you, President Geringer. There is nothing from Community Affairs on tonight's agenda. However, I do want to let especially the residents of the First Ward and anyone that travels possibly Western Avenue as you kind of head towards Dickey's Barbecue or up into Brewer Heights that the repairs are close to being finished on the evening of the July 4th destroyed wall there. And so that's good to see, and I think the weather's kind of hit at the right time for them to be able to finish laying and using the block that was messed up. They did a fantastic job utilizing the stone and make sure that all of the bricks could be reused as much as possible. And so I'm grateful to that, and I'll give some shout outs once we sew up everything at the next council meeting, but just wanted to pass that along. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we move to our Human Resource Committee. Due to the absence of Ms. Payne, are there any other members of the committee that have a report? Not seeing any, we'll move to our Development Committee with Ms. Nickerson.
Thank you, President Geringer. Development has nothing on the agenda tonight, and therefore we have nothing to report.
Thank you. Moving next to our Finance Committee with Mr. Tony Phillips.
Thank you, President Geringer. Finance has two things on the agenda tonight. One will be a third reading, an ordinance appropriating $4,000 for the use towards the purchase of a credit card machine and monthly credit card machine service charges for the remainder of 2022. Item number 8 on the agenda tonight is a first read. It's an ordinance accepting, appropriating, and transferring funds to extend and complete the 2022 paving program and declaring an emergency. At the appropriate time, I will be asking council to waive the 3-read rule on this for obvious reasons as we're approaching winter weather and need to get this project completed as soon as possible. That's all Finance has tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving next to our Parks and Recreation Committee with Ms. Henderson.
Thank you, President Geringer. Parks and Recreation has 3 items on tonight's agenda. Item number 3 is a second reading of street closure for the MAID Drug-Free Clubs of America rally. Item 4 is second reading of street closure for the annual JC's Halloween Parade. And then item 5 is a second reading of street closure for the first annual Polar Plunge community event hosted by the Greenies nonprofit organization. At the appropriate time, I'll be asking to waive the 3 reads on all 3 of these due to their upcoming events. And then this evening, we held a committee meeting on 2 other upcoming events. The first of which is the 11th annual Rudolph Run 5K, which will be held December 7th around 5:00 p.m. And then the second is the annual Light the Park event on Friday, November 18th, also beginning at 5 p.m. And that is all I have for this evening.
Thank you. Moving now to Safety Service Committee with Ms. Preston.
Thank you, President Geringer. Safety Service has 3 items on the agenda tonight. One was inadvertently left off. It was the criminal trespass legislation was supposed to be placed back on the agenda. It was going to be requested to be tabled. We also have number 2 at third reading. This will not be going to a third reading tonight. This is just appearing back on the agenda, and it will be going to a third reading on November 14th. We will be asking for some amendments to this legislation as well from a previous committee meeting. We also have number 6, an ordinance accepting and appropriating $11,449.84 received from Public Entity Risk Service of Ohio for weather-related damage to municipal court equipment and declaring an emergency. And at the appropriate time, I'll be asking to waive the 3-read rule on that, as the city has some bills that they need to pay in regards to that. We also had a Safety Service Committee meeting this evening. The item that was talked about was 22-126. It was in regards to a bailiff that is part-time, and it was requesting some hour increasage or some, can't find it. Too much stuff here. There it is. It provides, there's a ordinance 64-21 that establishes the employee positions for Chiillicothe Municipal Court. It provides for 2 part-time deputy bailiffs, each not to succeed 1,040 hours. There were some questions that arose in regards to this position, so I'm going to call a safety service meeting for November 2nd at 5:30 p.m. and I will request somebody from the municipal court come to answer those questions. And that is all that safety service has for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving next to our Engineering and City Services and Transit Committees, both chaired by Mr. Farrow. Mr. Farrow?
Thank you. For engineering, we have nothing on tonight's agenda. I will be calling for a committee meeting for next Monday, sometime this week. I'll send out via email some items such as the one to appropriate the funds for the wall that Mr. Greg Phillips spoke about. Then for city services and transit, we had a committee meeting this evening, nothing on the agenda, where we got some additional funds from South Central Ohio Job and Family Services to help pay for some rising fuel costs in that department. So I will forward that to the law director and hopefully have that on next meeting's agenda. That will be it.
Thank you. And finally, our Utilities Committee with Mr. Prohl.
The Utilities Committee has no items on tonight's agenda, but I would like to call for a utilities meeting at our next, before our next regular session, which I believe is November the 8th at 6:30. So that would be a Utilities Committee meeting at 6:30, November 8th. And that concludes my report. Is that the first Monday? Let's see here, Mr. 14th. Sorry, the 14th. November 14th. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes my report.
From there, we'll move on to our reports from our officials. In the absence of the mayor, we call on Mr. Jeff Carmen, Safety Service Director.
Thank you, President. Yes, the mayor is absent tonight. He apologizes, but he asked me to pinch hit for him, and I can assure Mr. Thacker that I will be brief tonight. So he asked me to report on 2 things. The first thing is leaf pickup. We're in our 2nd week of leaf pickup, which means if your trash is picked up on a Tuesday, it's your week to get your leaves picked up. But the leaves are falling fast, as we can see out there. If, we try to run 3 trucks, so we try to get to other neighborhoods as needed. So if you need your leaves picked up, call the service department. We'll do our best to get to you to get your leaves picked up. The other thing he asked me to report on was the 2022 paving project. Hopefully you've noticed that the striping is down. They worked very hard on that, I believe, Friday and Saturday to try to get that down before the weather turned on us. And I drive High Street, and it looks good coming through down through there. So that's all I have, President. Thank you.
Next, we'll move to our auditor, Mrs. Bettnagel.
That I wanted to briefly, thank you, talk about, and that's item number 8, an ordinance accepting and appropriating and transferring funds to extend the 2022 paving program. Currently, we are not appropriating additional money. This is accepting money from Columbia Gas for the repairs to High Street, their portion of payment. We also got an additional amount of money from OPWC, so that's accepting that grant money and appropriating that. And then we had some street money left over on a prior year PO. And when we have a prior year PO, when we close that, the money goes back into unappropriated funds. So if we want to use those, then we have to reappropriate those funds to be able to spend those. So that is what that the details of that ordinance. We've had 2 evenings of budget reviews. The next one will be on November 2nd. That's a Wednesday at 6 o'clock. I didn't have it this following Monday because that's October 31st and that's trick or treat night. So just to remind everybody that trick or treat is Monday from 6 to 7:30. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Next to our law director, Ms. Villarreal.
Thank you. We do not have a report this evening.
Moving on to audience participation. Council Rule 22 does limit each speaker to a 5-minute presentation and a total limitation of 15 minutes per any single subject. If you get to the point where you're getting close to 1 minute left, I will try to indicate to you so you can summarize your presentation. Anyone who wishes to speak, we do need for our records your name and address.
Jason Link, 17 Mead Drive. I imagine many of you are tired of hearing me talk about this livestock legislation. And frankly, I'm a little tired of talking about this livestock legislation as well. But I think it's important to keep talking about it because there continues to be concerns expressed by myself and by others that are not being addressed. I wonder how many of you think we have a livestock problem in the city of Chiillicothe. I wonder how many of you, before we started talking about this livestock legislation, received a phone call from anybody concerned with livestock in the city. I wonder if this current legislation that's being considered, if it's trying to fix a problem that doesn't really exist. At least doesn't exist or need to exist in a 3-page long, complicated and convoluted law. A 3-page long, complicated and convoluted law that in part unfairly impacts only 0.17% of property owners in Chiillicothe. There are only 22 properties. There was a couple incorrect entries on the auditor's website. 22 properties that fall into the category 5 to 10 or 10 acres. 22 properties out of 12,673 properties in Chiillicothe. And so if you move forward with approving this legislation that it currently is, you'll be unfairly impacting a very small percentage of property owners, something that's been found to be illegal in previous legal challenges. Part of the ruling in one of these cases found that the proposed zoning laws were irrational and arbitrary. 2 words that I would certainly use to describe the livestock legislation that you all are considering. I've submitted my questions and my concerns and my suggestions several times. For those who weren't at the Safety Service Committee meeting this past Monday, I have them typed out and I'd certainly be very willing to hand them to you. I've made requests to have open dialogue with those from 4-H and those who are involved with livestock through the Senior Fair Board, but those requests have not been granted. Instead, last week at the Safety Service Committee meeting, Councilmember Preston had already decided what amendments she would make to the legislation before the meeting even started. There was no openness to any of the suggestions brought at that Safety Service Committee meeting. So much for open dialogue. I have to say that the cherry on the top for me with this legislation is the penalty that someone could face for having a goat in their backyard. As the legislation currently reads, it could be up to a $250 fine and up to 30 days in jail. Seems a little harsh to me, especially considering in Ohio, the penalty for having up to 100 grams of marijuana in your possession is a $150 fine and no possibility of jail time. If this legislation passes as it is written, I will sure sleep well at night, knowing that you, the City Council of Chiillicothe, are more concerned with keeping goats out of people's backyards than illegal drugs off our city streets. Thank you.
Hello, friends. My name is the Reverend Terry Williams. I reside at 47.5 East Main Street. I've got a question about criminal trespass first. The piece was supposed to be on the agenda, and it's not on the agenda, is there a way that we can move to add it to the agenda so that it gets read? Okay, I'd really appreciate that because, okay, that it be added as item number 9, that it then sit, because it's very important to me that that legislation not go forward. And that's good. I appreciate that because that legislation is really bad legislation. And, you know, we spent forever trying to explain that to the committee and got about as far as the chicken people did. The chicken ordinance, I'm a little concerned with because now that it's been amended, what were the words? Arbitrary and what was it? You said arbitrary and irrational. So the new legislation, as it's amended, that top tier of homeowner that has more than 10 acres, they're only allowed to have 1 animal per every 5 acres of land. Well, it's interesting because that means if your lot is 10.00 acres, you have to have at least 20 feet between you and any building that, you know, comes up next to your property line. But you're allowed to have 10 cows on that property. And if you have 10.01 acres, now all of a sudden you have to be 150 feet in from your property line, but you're only allowed to have 2 cows. So 2 cows on 10.01 acres or 10 cows on 10.00 acres. That sounds pretty arbitrary to me. It's kind of frustrating because it seems like the way that this legislation was written, it was just whack-a-mole. Somebody came up with a problem over here and we'll fix that for them. But it causes another problem in another part of the legislation. We'll fix that problem. And now we have an arbitrary and I'd say pretty capricious law. The other struggle I have in this is when you look at the setback. 20 feet from the property line sounds pretty reasonable until you start looking at places in the city that people actually live. 20 feet back from the property line means that the vast majority of people who live in my ward of the city, which is the 4th ward, represented by Mr. Farrow, and in the 6th ward, represented by Mr. Brown, vast majority of those people live on lots that are only 40 feet wide, which means this amounts to a complete and total ban on any 4-H project or FFA project, because after all, the 4-H and FFA exemptions are just for the type of animal as it's written in this legislation. It says explicitly that it's just for the type of animal, it's not for any other part of the legislation. So people are allowed to have the animal, they just can't build it a house. They can't build it anything to be able to come into or sit under. So what this legislation is saying is if you want to have a 4-H or FFA project, better not live on the poor end of town. Better not have a narrow lot of, 40 feet. Better not be in the 4th and the 6th ward for the most part. There are several places, obviously, that contravene that. But the vast majority of those 40-foot wide lots, they're over in the East End. They're the people in this legislation who get hit the worst. A total ban just because they don't have enough width in their property. And now we look at the 150-foot setback, which apparently got written in, again, as Mr. Link, the Reverend Dr. Link, addressed, got put in because somebody came and complained about it. Well, it's going to be really interesting when we start to see some kind of challenge to this when it's written in for, 22, 23 pieces of property. It's a real concern to me that this legislation was written the way it was. The way the Reverend Dr. Link brought it up, there were decisions made on this legislation, obviously, before it was brought to the committee. Now, all decisions that are made on legislation, you are required to have in open meeting. Now, we suspect that that probably wasn't an open meeting because it was brought immediately to discussion. It was introduced as this is what we're going to do with this legislation. But we also know that the notice for that meeting was not properly given according to council rules. I made requests for that proper notice. I've been denied in getting that request. It's a frustration. This legislation not adopted in open meetings, not going to stand. It's bad legislation, shouldn't have been written in the first place. And if you pass it, it's going to be a major problem. You should probably send that legislation back just like you're going to do with the other legislation on criminal trespass. Just table it and let it go.
Now from the sublime to the ridiculous. My name is John Thacker. I live at 990 Columbus Street, apartment 307. I was about ready to say that I left my apartment too quickly and I grabbed the wrong hat, but that's not actually true. What's actually true is that I wanted to show my support for these gentlemen and all the other people who oppose the livestock ordinance. Personally, for me, livestock is something you go to the store and buy and eat. But for a lot of people, it's a livelihood for 4-H members that is an important part of the learning process for young people. And I realize you trying to make accommodations to some extent to reflect those concerns. But I guess ultimately, I would say that if those concerns have not been met, then you should probably vote to either table or get rid of the ordinance, the changes to the ordinance. And that's it. Thank you.
We will now move on to old business. Does anyone have any old business they would like to bring up this evening?
Mr. President, I hope this is the appropriate time. I would like to ask if the council has on file a list or tracking of reports from all the outstanding committee assignments. The reason I ask is I spoke with John Thacker earlier in the week, last week, and he turned my attention to assignment number 22-102, and that was the establishment of that special exploratory committee for ballot recommendation, reducing number of city council members. So getting in the swing of things, it seems that I will likely inherit a position on that assignment, but also just if there is a space for me to refer to kind of catch up on those outstanding assignments.
Mr. Brown, earlier in the year when I took over as clerk, I was starting to compile a list of everything that had come since I have been sitting, so I can email what I have up to today to you, so you can have that. It just says what committee, what the number is, what it's about. That's what I have that I can share with you. So.
And specifically to the reports, then refer to the committee chair, and the committee chair will have the reports from their committee. And then specifically again to 22-102, that would go to Mrs. Payne, who I do not believe has held a committee on that to this point. So you have not missed out on that report.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you both.
President Geringer, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we rescind the previous votes approving absences on June 16th, 2022 and July 11th, 2022.
Motion by Ms. Henderson to rescind the votes for approved absences. Do I have a second? Seconded by Ms. Preston. Roll call on the motion to rescind the votes on absences for the dates outlined by Ms. Henderson.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Abstain.
Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion passes.
President Geringer, I'd like to make a motion that we revote, approve the absences of the following council members, Payne, Nickerson, and Park, and vote on each of them separately, please. And that one is for the June 16th, 2022 meeting.
That is a motion to excuse Payne, Nickerson, and Park, and we'll vote on those individually. So, is there a second to the motion to excuse Ms. Payne from June 16th? Seconded by Mr. Phillips. Roll call on the motion to excuse Ms. Payne from the June 16th meeting.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Abstain.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the motion to excuse Ms. Nickerson from the June 16th meeting.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Abstain.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Abstain.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the motion to excuse Ms. Park from the June 16th meeting.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Abstain.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Motion passes.
President Garinger, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we excuse the absences of the following council members from the July 11th council meeting: Phillips, Payne, and Preston, and again, separately. As for Greg Phillips, not Anthony Phillips.
I'm Greg. Second on the motion to excuse from the July 11th meeting. Seconded by Mr. Prohl. Roll call on the motion for excused absences from the July 11th. I think.
Greg Phillips. Yeah, it's. Okay. Nickerson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Abstain.
Preston,
Abstain.
Anthony Phillips.
Or was that? Oh, wait. Can I go back? That was on you, not me, right? Okay. Yes. I vote yes.
Preston. Okay, Anthony Phillips.
Oh, but I can't. vote no. Yes.
Yeah, you can vote
Okay.
now. You couldn't have voted on it then.
Okay. Sorry. Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
And Greg Phillips.
Abstain.
Roll call on the motion to excuse Ms. Payne from the July 11th meeting.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Brown,
Abstain.
Henderson,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the motion to excuse Ms. Preston from the July 11th meeting.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Preston,
Abstain.
Brown,
Abstain.
Henderson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Motion passes. Any additional old business to be brought up at this time?
Mr. President, I share a lot of the concerns I heard about the ordinance amending section 505.14, the codified ordinance of the Chiillicothe, as it pertains to livestock being kept or harbored within the corporation limits of the city of Chiillicothe. Mainly, my ward, the 6th ward, and the ability for my neighbors and I to enjoy the same access to livestock as the rest of the city. So it's referenced before, but section B1C Buildings for livestock storage or management shall not be located in the front or side yard of any home and shall not be located closer than 20 feet from the property line and shall be constructed in alignment with zoning and building codes. So while there's a larger question of government overreach on private property, there's also concerns for myself about the efficacy of that 4-H exemption, which Section B1C would effectively negate. So an overwhelming number of children in the 4th and 6th wards would be haggled out of the opportunities their peers throughout the rest of the city enjoy. So for those reasons, I motion that the council indefinitely suspend any movement on this ordinance.
Motion made by Mr. Brown, seconded by
I'll second.
Ms. Nickerson. Roll call on the motion to suspend the livestock ordinance.
Greg Phillips.
No.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Farrow.
No.
Henderson.
No.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
No.
Anthony Phillips.
No.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion fails. Any additional old business at this time?
I believe I need to make a motion to not have the legislation, yes, for item number 2, to not be read for the 3rd reading this evening.
Motion to suspend the reading of item number 2 by Ms. Preston, seconded by Mr. Prohl. Roll call on the motion.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
President Geringer, I'd also like to make a motion to add the criminal trespass legislation as item number 9 on the agenda. It would be at a 2nd read.
Seconded by Ms. Henderson. Roll call on the motion to add item 9, criminal trespass legislation, back to the agenda.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Motion passes. We will now move to participation and correspondence received by the clerk.
Thank you, President Geringer. I have not received any petitions or correspondence.
I think that I also need to waive the 3-day receipt rule on adding number 9, criminal trespass.
Motion to waive the 3-day read rule on the criminal trespass to the agenda.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Nickerson. Roll call on the motion.
Prohl.
That's a 3-day receipt, correct? Okay. Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Motion passes. Any additional old business? We'll now move to participation and correspondence received by the clerk.
Thank you, President Geringer. I have not received anything.
Moving to new business. Is there any items for new business that anyone would like to bring up at this time? Mr. Prohl.
I believe item number 7 does belong to the Utilities Department, and I overlooked it, but we do need to take action on that tonight. That is an ordinance transferring $150,000 for the sewer repair project at Water Street and at Watt and Water Street, and declaring an emergency. And I would ask that we, at the appropriate time, waive the 3-read rule. And that's all.
Thank you. From there, we'll move on to our legislation. With the removal of one item and the addition of one item, we still have 8 items on the agenda this evening. Ms. Moss, whenever you're ready, we'll start with item number 1.
Item number 1 is a third reading of an ordinance appropriating $4,000 for the use toward the purchase of a credit card machine and monthly credit card machine service charges for the remainder of 2022.
Roll call on the ordinance.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Ordinance passes. Item number 2.
Item number 2 is a second reading of a resolution expressing cooperation and granting use of a certain portion of Paint Street for the May drug-free rally and declaring an emergency.
President Geringer, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we waive the three read rule.
Motion by Ms. Henderson, seconded by Mr. Prohl. Roll call on the motion to waive the 3-day read rule. 3 read rule, sorry.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the resolution.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
The resolution passes. Item number 4.
Item number 3 is the second reading of a resolution granting the use of Yoctangi Park and certain city streets for the annual JC's Halloween Parade on Saturday, October 29th, 2022, and declaring an emergency.
President Geringer, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we waive the three read rule.
Motion by Ms. Henderson, seconded by Mr. Greg Phillips. Roll call on the motion to waive the 3 read rule.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the resolution.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Resolution passes. Item number 5.
Is a second reading of a resolution expressing cooperation and granting use of a certain portion of Paint Street to the Greenies nonprofit organization for its Polar Plunge community event and declaring an emergency.
President Geringer, at this time, I'd also like to make a motion that we waive the 3 read rule on this.
Motion by Ms. Henderson, seconded by Mr. Prohl. Roll call on the motion to waive the 3 read rule.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the resolution.
Farrow,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Prohl, Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Resolution passes. Item number 6.
President Geringer,
Yes, Ms. President.
at this time, I would like to request to waive the 3-read rule on this.
I'm confused. What number are we on?
Number 6. Or I guess number 5. You change the numbers.
So, Ms. Preston, the motion needs to be to remove item 6 due to communication error on the agenda on Friday. It'll need to be moved to the 11:14 agenda.
Okay. All right. Okay. I make a motion to remove item number 6 from the agenda due to the legislation not being disseminated. Is that right? Okay. It'll be moved to. It's item number 5. Should be 6, but it's item number 5. Yeah. And the legislation was inadvertently left off the.
Seconded by
email.
Mr. Brown. Motion to remove item 6 due to communication error. It will be reseen on 11:14.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion passes. Item number 7.
Item number 7 is the first reading of an ordinance transferring $150,000 for the sewer repair project at Watt Street and Water Street and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Prohl.
As I stated earlier, I would like to waive the 3-read rule because I'm a fan of sewer repair.
Everyone. Mr. Brown. Roll call on the motion.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson, Prohl.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the ordinance.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Ordinance passes. Number 8.
Item number 8 is the first reading of an ordinance accepting, appropriating, and transferring funds to extend and complete the 2022 paving program and declaring an emergency.
Council President, this is would be item number 7, and I would like to make a motion to waive the 3-read rule.
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Tony Phillips, seconded by Ms. Nickerson. Roll call on the motion.
Prohl,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Farrow.
Yes.
Roll call on the ordinance.
Farrow,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Ordinance passes. Item number 9. That second.
Is it second, Julie?
Second reading, Julie, on. It comes back.
Okay, item number 9 is the second reading of an ordinance amending section 541.05 criminal trespass of the codified ordinances of the city of Chiillicothe, Ohio.
President Geringer, I'd like to make a motion at this time to place that legislation on the table.
Motion by Ms. Preston, seconded by Ms. Henderson. Roll call on the motion.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
That item has been tabled. Does anyone have anything else that they would like to bring up or add at this time? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Motion by Ms. Henderson, seconded by Ms. Nickerson. Roll call on the motion.
Farrow,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl, Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
We are adjourned. Have a wonderful evening.